Hi, Daisy and Eli. How's it going?
Good.
Hi, good.
Good to see you again. You ready to talk about Hong Kong and China?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to remind anyone following along at home that if you haven't already, go back and watch the introductory video and read the background materials below. And then as we have our conversation, you can pause the video and have your own conversation at home. And with all of that said, let's dive in. Let's start with, before you did any of the background reading, if I had asked you what Hong Kong is, what kind of answer would you have given? What was your knowledge or understanding of Hong Kong?
I thought Hong Kong. I didn't really know what Hong Kong was. I knew that it was a huge. I honestly kind of thought it was just like a. Is it a city? I
Yep.
honestly thought it was.
Yep.
I just thought it was a city with a lot of people and good
Yep,
food.
all of that's true. And Daisy, what did you have any thoughts at all about Hong Kong? What did you think?
I think I'd say it's probably in China. I wouldn't know it was part of British at all.
Britain.
I'd probably say it was pretty high tech.
That's true.
It's like all I really knew about it. Well, I
Okay,
knew
so
more.
that idea of it being in China is an interesting jumping off point. So now that you've done the background reading, and now that we're digging into it, would you say Hong Kong is in China? Would you say it's a part of China? How would you describe its relationship to
A
China?
part of China.
I'd say some people might not agree with that opinion. Some people might. But pretty much Hong Kong is part of China.
But it's also different from China in some ways, different from mainland China. Let's make that distinction.
Yeah.
Eli, what are the differences?
Well, Hong Kong is an island, I believe. Isn't it?
Mhm.
Okay. And China is part of Asia.
Well, but
It's a
politically, legally, in terms of rights and freedoms, what's the difference between Hong Kong and, say, Beijing?
They were very different. One was pretty much Hong Kong was pretty much democratic, and and Beijing was not democratic. And
That's
now
exactly right.
Hong Kong is pretty much not democratic at all, but people are trying to fight to get it democratic.
Well, let's say that Beijing had influence, but not control over Hong Kong. Does that seem like a fair distinction?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the episode of This American Life that you listened to had a lot of stories about the protests in the streets. And do you remember what people were protesting about?
They were protesting about free speech, being allowed to have democracy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Daisy, do you remember why people were marching in the streets?
Yeah, honestly, at first I thought it was because they didn't want to self-isolate, but then I realized that it was because they didn't want to be a part of China because China monitors tech. Like, there's details to that I'm not remembering. It's just a vague.
They monitor
explanation.
stuff and they restrict.
Yeah, and they restrict stuff. And I think they wanted to be a free country.
Hong Kong.
And there might have been another reason, but I think
Hong Kong didn't want to be a free country. They wanted to be a democratic part of China.
Those are all exactly right. And Daisy, I understand why you would think at first the protests were about social distancing and isolation, because in the United States over the last several weeks, we've seen a lot of protests about COVID-19. But remember, the episode of This American Life that I sent you to listen to was from October. So that was before the pandemic. So when you imagine these people marching in the streets, there was no COVID-19 at all. And this was about something completely different. This was about whether Hong Kong would be a free country where people could say and do and think in whatever way they wanted, more like the United States, or a country like mainland China, where the government exerts a lot of control and censorship and regulates what you can talk about and what you can write and what opinions you can even express. Because in mainland China, if people tried to march in the streets the way they did in Hong Kong, they wouldn't be allowed to.
And also, it confused me even more because they said they were wearing all black and masks. So I thought they were protecting themselves. And I thought
They are
COVID.
kind of from gas.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
But I thought they were just like regular masks that you wear when you're like walking or
Right, because today we see everybody wearing masks. I
Yeah.
can understand why that would be confusing. Eli, what did you think of when you heard those descriptions of the protests?
I thought, wow, and at first I was like, well, there's nothing violent, so why are they attacking them? But then I realized there was violence. Like, the protesters were hurting people. It wasn't a completely peaceful protest like I thought at first. It's actually kind of violent, and like they have the reasons, but I mean, it's violent.
I don't think they were necessarily hurting people. I think they were hurting objects.
No, they were people.
Well, it sounds like they were more hurting objects, like throwing things and stuff like that.
But they
You know, I'm curious. I know that you're only 11, right?
Yeah.
Okay. In your 11 years on the planet Earth, has there ever been any protest or demonstration that you've taken part in? Have you ever been to a march or a rally or somewhere that a bunch of people gathered and were chanting things?
We went to one gay rights one, I believe it was.
And what if you lived in a country where a rally like that would be shut down, would not be allowed to happen, where people marching and cheering and protesting for what they believe in were tear gassed and locked up and arrested?
I think that would change people's bravery a lot. Especially if people went from being like sharing what they believed to just like being hurt for sharing what they believed.
Yeah.
If I lived there and I was part of those protests, then I would sneak behind the policemen's lines who were throwing tear gas canisters, grab one, and use their own weapons against them. But
well, you know,
maybe
the situation.
Who knows?
The situation that I'm asking you to imagine is the situation that these protesters in Hong Kong found themselves in. And so the question that those protesters had to face is, if you are threatened with arrest or tear gas or being beaten up, do you just stay home and stay safe and keep out of trouble? Or do you keep going back to protest for what you believe in? And that's a really tough choice.
I really think it depends on the person. And it's not saying people who are afraid of being hurt don't believe in the cause or what you're doing. It's saying I'm doing this for my safety, and some people think that them sharing their rights, even though safety is at risk, is important, and it sends a message.
Yeah. So what does it tell you that these people in Hong Kong kept going out and protesting day after day after day, even though they knew that they could get hurt or arrested or fired from their job for doing it?
Because they really believed in their cause.
Yeah, they really thought it was important.
Yeah. You know, there are so many causes that every person believes in, and some of them are not that important, and some are like so vital and essential to the person who you are and the world that you want to live in, that there are some causes I can imagine you'd say, oh yeah, I'll go join a march, I'll join a rally, I'll join a protest for that, but I'm not going to sacrifice my safety or my life or put myself in danger for it. And then there are other causes that are just so important. You think, yeah, even if I get tear gassed or fired from my job or beaten up by the police, I'm going to go back the next day and protest again.
Yeah.
Can you think of anything that you believe in that strongly? And it's okay if the answer is no. Or it's okay if you don't know, because sometimes you don't know until you're in the situation.
D&D.
Dungeons and Dragons, the role-playing game, you would get beaten up by police and go back and protest the next day to be allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Definitely.
I think you already are allowed to play.
Well, let's imagine the authorities restricted it. What about for you, Daisy? Is there something you believe in that deeply?
I don't know. I think I would have to be there in the moment to think of it.
Yeah. Or be told that you couldn't do something that you appreciate now and just take for granted. You know, right now, I interviewed somebody today who said something that I thought was so beautiful. He said, freedom is like air. When you have enough of it, you don't really think about the fact that you have all you need. And when you barely have enough of it, then it's all you can think about.
Yeah.
And so right now, we have a lot of freedom. And so we don't necessarily think about, would I be willing to get beaten up by police or tear gassed to fight for my freedom? Because it's just something like air. It's all around us. We breathe it, we have it. And it's only if we suddenly didn't have enough of it that we would have to ask ourselves, how far would I go? How much would I fight to protect this?
Yeah. It's a nice saying.
What about the story? So we started off with the This American Life episode from October. And then I sent you an article about what China's doing right now with Hong Kong. Can you summarize what that article was about? Can you describe what's happening now?
Easy. I feel like right now it's kind of just laws waiting to be passed, and a lot of less protesters, but still a lot of protesters. But I mean, it's kind of the same, and it's kind of been the same for a while.
Well, so China made a very bold move recently, and China really surprised the rest of the world by suggesting something new that people were not expecting. Eli, do you remember from the article what that was?
Wasn't it you can't like insult the national anthem or something?
That's part of it. It's called a national security law. And national security is a big blanket term that encompasses a lot of things. But basically, the national security law that China proposed would take away a whole lot of the freedoms that people in Hong Kong had been protesting for last year. But if you remember, people protesting in Hong Kong were afraid that China would do this years from now. And China didn't wait years. China just now said, okay, Hong Kong, we are going to take control, and we are going to exert authority, and we are going to pass this national security law so that we can crack down on free expression and public protests, and we can censor the things that you say online. And those would be huge, huge changes in Hong Kong if they happened. And it looks like they're probably going to happen, which is what those protesters had been afraid of for all of those months that they were marching in the streets.
Yeah.
So if you were one of the protesters, what do you think you'd be doing right now when not only is the thing that you were afraid of coming to pass, but also now there's COVID-19. So gathering in large groups becomes dangerous for a completely different reason.
Well, it depends. If the cause was utterly and completely hopeless, I would get on a boat to somewhere safe, like the U.S. or Brazil or I don't know where. It will probably be my second to last choice. My last choice being jump in the ocean and swim for it. But I would probably keep protesting in very small protests, if at all. So don't get COVID, and I would also stay away from people and wear a really good mask.
Yeah, but you would keep fighting.
Far away from people.
Yeah. What about you, Daisy? What do you think you would do?
When I get mad, I do things faster. I feel like, so I might write letters because I type very fast when I'm mad. I don't send things when I'm mad. I type things. And I think I'd send letters.
To who?
Being very honest, well, to like the government and stuff, and complimenting them and being anonymous. And I just keep on sending letters if I was in this position. And then one day, I just completely spill out the truth and how I felt. They think I was a good person, and they send me back letters, and
Yeah. Did you take a look at the third article I sent, which didn't seem like it was about China and Hong Kong, but I thought that it might help provide some context?
Which one? The one about how a lot of governments might be like, oh, we might not release the state of emergency, so we'll always have control.
That's the one. So I guess my first question would be, why do you think I included that article? How do you think that relates to what's happening with China and Hong Kong?
Because China could do that.
I mean, I honestly, if I could rename it, I'd probably rename it erupted because I feel like Europe sees like China doing this, and Europe is, I think, a democracy, or I think I'm using the wrong word.
Europe's
like,
Well, there are a lot of European countries, many of which are democracies. Yeah.
Yeah. You're like, oh, this democracy is doing that. Why don't we try? So I think it ties it all together, saying this is not only China. This is other states.
Well, that article had a lot of other examples. Beyond European countries, it included Brazil and Israel and a lot of countries that are even beyond Europe. And go ahead, yeah.
Brazil. Have they re-elected a new president?
The man who was president, Jair Bolsonaro, is still president. But what do all of the countries that were in that article have in common? I mean, some are democracies, some are not democracies at all, some are in Latin America, some are in the Middle East, some are in Europe, some are in Asia, but they were all in the article for one reason. Do you know what that reason is?
They all have COVID-19.
Well, that's true. Pretty much every country in the world right now has COVID-19. But what were all of them doing right now?
I feel like they're all trying to take power.
Exactly right.
Like, oh, I'm the only one who can revoke the state of emergency, and I can crack down on any residents as long as the state of emergency is there.
And why do you think they're able to do that now?
Because they're like, oh, everybody's so worried. Don't worry, we'll call this a state of emergency. That only in the fine print that looks just like a border. No, they wouldn't actually do that. That would probably be against the law or something. I also am the only one who can revoke this thing. If you're reading this, shoot, my plot has been foiled. Haha, if you don't read this.
Eli, you gave the exact right answer, which is people are really afraid right now. And that's a good time to say, I can take care of you. All you have to do is give me control over all of these different aspects of your life, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. Whether that means we'll close the borders, or we'll trace your location using technology, or we will lock up people who express points of view that we disagree with. And there was an old expression, never let a good crisis go to waste. What do you think that means?
Always take control during a crisis and use it to your advantage.
Yeah, Daisy, what do you think about that expression, never let a good crisis go to waste?
I think it's saying like crisis is that even a word?
Crises.
Crises are events where worry happens. And when worry happens, people don't think like as straight. They think this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. Repeated. I won't repeat it for you.
Yeah.
And they don't think, how can I help? So the people in bigger power say, this is how we can help. We're going to get that this has happened to it happened. And then you stop worrying, and then you see what happened. And you're like,
you are so insightful to say that during a crisis, people worry and they look to someone for help. And if the person they look to for help has a list of things they've always wanted to do, and they say, now I can get away with doing them because of this crisis, suddenly you're able to implement a national security law in Hong Kong, or implement surveillance policies that would have been, when I say surveillance policies, do you know what I mean? Do you know what surveillance is?
We can watch you. We can have cameras posted everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not gonna
And then once you put those policies in place, it can be really tough to undo them.
Not that anybody in the government that passed the law would even try to undo it.
Right. So what do you think the solution to that is? I mean, you know, in the case of Hong Kong and China, the fact is there might not be a solution. China might be able to just push this law through, and there's nothing that protesters in Hong Kong might be able to do about it. But in a democracy like the United States or England or Germany, what do you think the solution is to this problem?
Wait, England's a democracy?
Yeah, England's a democracy.
I thought it was a monarchy.
Oh, well, that's a good point. It's complicated, but the monarch in England is just kind of a figurehead, just sort of do you know what a figurehead is? Sort of like a symbol. Okay, Daisy, you're waiting very patiently. What do you think the answer is?
I guess it would be sharing your opinion, because little things can go a long way, and sharing compromises. Compromises are always great. Like if you really want this to happen, but you know the government or your government might say it won't, making a compromise really gets a long way.
Yeah. The point you made about making your voice heard and expressing your opinion is a really good one, because in a democracy, people have a right to say what they think and express their point of view and speak their mind. And in a democracy, people also have a right to vote. And if the government is doing something that the people don't like, in a democracy, the people can vote to put somebody else in charge of the government, because the government is responsive to the people. And that's different from China. In China, people don't elect the government. In China, the Communist Party controls the government, and the government decides what's best for the people. But in democracies, the people get to choose their leaders. And if they don't like what the leaders are doing, they can choose different ones.
Yeah, so they would be like choosing the people in the Communist Party.
Yeah. Did you have any questions about the background materials that we've been talking about?
I had one. It was in the one that was unrelated at first sight, but not really about it. I was confused. I thought the Brazilian president was impeached because he wasn't doing anything or something.
I don't believe the Brazilian president was, a previous Brazilian president was impeached, but the current Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, has been there since before COVID-19. There was a Brazilian president named Dilma Rousseff. I think that was her name. Anyway, but that was previously, and she did get into legal trouble. But the current Brazilian president is, like so many other world leaders, using this crisis as an opportunity to seize power and implement policies that otherwise might have been more difficult for him to get through.
Okay, yeah, I'm probably thinking about someplace else or something.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I think this might have been answered in one of the documents / articles / listen tos, but why does China think Hong Kong will help out with security? They said it would help, like, keep the place more safe.
You know, often when a government wants control over something, national security is the excuse they use. It is the way that they justify grabbing more power. So we've seen the same thing in Russia and in the Philippines, where the government wants control. And so they say, these people are plotting against our country. And in order to protect the country and keep the country safe, we need to lock these people up or monitor these people's movements or send these people to re-education camps or whatever the thing is. They say it's for national security, but the real reason is power and control.
Like, oh, that's a competitor for the presidency.
Exactly. Now, why do you think national security is such a good catchphrase to use for these kinds of power grabs?
Because national security is literally, I'm going to find people to lock up in prison.
Well, people want to be safe. I mean, most people.
Yeah.
Probably all people. Please tell me if you don't want to be safe. And if they say this helps out with your safety, lots of people are going to go to grab it because, I mean, you can have a good life. Sure, you can get benefits. That might be a little, like, you know, fishy. Like, you get a free iPod. Oh, it's a giant, like, gambling thing. But, yeah, but,
you made it
realistic and it seems easy to grab.
You make a really great point that national security is about personal safety. And personal safety is super important. National security actually is a vital, essential thing. And if a government is not protecting national security, that government is not doing its job. And if the government is not keeping its people safe, then the government is failing. So when a government says, well, I need to keep you safe, everybody says, yes, we agree, because that's true. And the government says, therefore, we need to protect national security. And everyone says, yes, that's true. And the government says, therefore, we need to prevent anyone from protesting in the street and marching and holding picket signs. And some percentage of people will say, well, okay, I guess if you say that's what we need to do to protect national security, I want to be safe, so I guess you know best.
Yeah.
And that's the way a government can open the door to China claiming national security will allow it to censor what people say online or in books, for example. Any final thoughts or questions?
Not really.
Sure.
You explained everything really well.
It said the law was being passed soon about the that you could go into people's homes without a search warrant. I was wondering, because I didn't know when the article was published, how soon will that happen?
This is in Hong Kong, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't happened yet, and nobody knows how soon it'll be, but things are moving really quickly. In fact, just I think yesterday, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo declared that Hong Kong is no longer an independent entity separate from China. And so already things are moving really quickly,
Oh, like
much faster than anyone would have expected a few months ago.
Pompeo not considered them a separate entity, or was it announced that they were not a separate entity and like Pompeo was just the one to announce it?
Pompeo was the one who announced that U.S. policy now is to no longer treat Hong Kong as a separate entity from China.
But China still them a separate entity.
Well, China is sort of in the process of trying to like slurp up Hong Kong and absorb it, you know? And so the question is, when is that process complete? Well, it's something that is kind of underway right now. And the US is making a statement that's like, we see what you're doing and we don't like it and there will be consequences. But that probably won't be enough to stop China from doing it. Well, we are getting close to the end of the semester. We're gonna at least take a break for July and August, but we're here at the end of May, beginning of June, which means we've only got a couple weeks left of like our traditional current events class. And then for the last 2 weeks of June, I'm gonna give you a final project assignment that you'll have 2 weeks to work on, okay? So part of the final project will be to choose one of the topics that we've talked about over these last however many weeks that you want to dig into a little deeper yourself and do a little more research in. So I'll give you more details once we get to that point a couple weeks from now, but you could even start percolating now and think about what is the topic we've talked about that you are most interested in digging more deeply into on your own and doing your own research about. And if you want to choose the same topic, you can, but I would be even happier if the two of you choose two different topics. Okay? So you don't have to make a decision now, but it can be something that you just start thinking over.
Yeah.
All right?
Cool.
Okay. Thanks for another great lesson.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Thanks for
Bye.
Bye.